think that the problem that happens for a lot of photographers or wedding photographers, especially when they're starting out, is that they don't have a lot of gear necessarily. And cameras are expensive. It feels like a burden to have multiple camera bodies or to have all this stuff, but you absolutely need to have a backup. And online forums are a great place to just kind of like drive yourself crazy. I saw somebody had commented, I think this was on Reddit, where it said you need to have a backup camera, and someone said, I've got my phone. And I was just like, oh no, no.
Hey, welcome to episode 362 of the Beginner Photography Podcast, brought to you by CloudSpot, the all-in-one solution for photographers to deliver and sell your photos online. As always, I am your host, Raymond Hatfield, and today we are chatting with wedding photographer Casey Fatchett about how to be a bad wedding photographer. I realized the other day that for some reason, all of the info out there on the internet about being a wedding photographer is how to be a good wedding photographer. And I'm sure some of you want to be a bad wedding photographer, or maybe you just want to know what mistakes to avoid so that you don't become a bad wedding photographer. So guess what? I got you covered in today's episode here with Casey, who has not only shot more than 800 weddings, but is the host of the Nerdy Photographer podcast as well. Now, this is a long episode because, well, there's a lot that goes into being a bad wedding photographer. It's not just mistakes like I forgot to have a client sign a contract, or I thought I knew where the church was, but I showed up at the wrong church, both of which I have done myself. But these are like wrong decisions that a photographer could make throughout the day. And stick around towards the end where I actually ask ChatGPT what photographers can do to ruin a couple's wedding day. You don't want to miss its surprising answer. So with that, let's go ahead and get on into today's interview with Casey Fatchett. Casey, I know that today we are going to be sharing how to be a bad wedding photographer. And as I was preparing for this, some of the questions, some of the tips, I kind of thought in my head, this might sound really pretentious if we do this. So instead of asking you my regular first question, which is when did you know that photography was going to play an important role in your life? My first question for you today is, well, I just want to know that you're human. So can you tell me about one of the worst wedding experiences you've ever had as a photographer?
As it was my fault?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Well, there's two that I can think of. One, I was in the middle of the shooting the wedding, and this was fairly early on in my career, and my flash died. Like it completely went out, and I didn't have another one.
Oh no.
I had like the one that was on my other camera body, and that was it. Like so, then I was switching up my style. It's a super super dark venue, which is where you really need flash.
Yeah.
And I wasn't. This was before off-camera flash was like as popular as it is now, and I didn't have an off-camera flash set up. And yeah, so basically with one camera body, I just pulled out my like 50 1.4 and was shooting everything that I could, and hoping that some of it came out at like as wide open as possible and like at a pretty high ISO. And I looked back at those photos recently, and I was like, ooh. Ugh, technology was not quite good enough at that point for like noise reduction, and I think that there was a lot of it was pretty grainy images, and I'm not really, I wouldn't say proud of those photos. Looking back on them now, it was not good. And the other was where I only had one camera, and my camera died the day before. This was lucky. My camera died the day before the wedding. And it was a good thing that I went like getting ready for this wedding, which I had traveled for.
Oh no.
This is again earlier on in my career, and I had like traveled to the Midwest for this wedding, and I went to check out my gear the day before, and like the camera just wasn't even turning on. There was not even getting an error message. I had to go out and buy a new camera.
Ouch.
The day before this wedding. So yeah, I would say that was a painful process. Because I also didn't get the camera that I really wanted if I was going to like buy a new camera at that point. Yeah, that wasn't so good. Those I would probably calculate as my. I was also like when I got this new camera, it like the menus and everything were like just slightly different than the older camera that I had previously. So I was still trying to like figure things out the next day. I always tell people, like, if you're getting a new camera, don't like get it just before you're about to go on a job, which I will say I recently I've not fully made the switch to mirrorless, but I got a mirrorless camera, got the R5,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm still figuring out everything. Like it took me a little while to figure out, like, if I had tried to go on a shoot within like 3 days of getting that thing, I would not have been able to do the things that I normally do with my camera,
Wow.
just because like the menus and how you get to certain things are different. Like the layout is very different as far as the switching from different types of metering or getting into, basically have to switch it over to the movie mode to be able to change the movie settings, which I didn't
Oh,
realize at first. Like that was like you normally, for me, all that stuff is leading up to that was all in the same settings on your menu. Now there are two different sets of menus. There's one
right.
for like stills, and then there's one for movies or film or video, and you need to switch into the video mode before you can change those settings. So I was like, how the hell do I change the resolution of the video? I want to try it out. And then I'm like, I guess I have to actually read instructions.
That's the worst when you actually have to read instructions. Oh man,
My
I get
grandfather used to say that instructions are for people who don't know what they're doing.
it. Right. Yeah, that's the point of the instructions.
Yeah, but
That's
he
why they're there.
jokingly like, we don't do that.
We'll just
We know,
figure it out.
we'll figure it out.
Do you find that true today, where you typically don't look at a manual? You think because of that?
Yeah, I mean, I will. My first experience with any new piece of equipment is always to just try it out
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and see how things work. And if, hey, then I will go in and be like, all right, I need to do a deeper dive and like really sink into the menus and things like that and how things are done. And then if there's something I can't figure out, then I will open up the book and be like, all right, how do I do this? Usually for me, like the Canon DSLRs had pretty much the same menus
Yeah.
for a long time. So that you weren't really like, you didn't really have to do much anything different. This menu setup is a little different. The controls are like slightly different on the R5. I find it now more of an issue with lighting equipment
Hmm.
now with flashes, which is usually because like then like there's a new like whatever, if there's an evolution from one model to the next model, they tend to add new features when sometimes you don't know where those features are or how to get to them. So then I find myself like going through the manual and going, all right, how the hell do I do
What
this
do I
now?
do here?
I
Yeah.
used to know how to do this. Then you got rid of the two of the buttons on the back of the flash, and now they're like buried in like a menu setting somewhere instead of being able to just quickly hit a button.
Right. I've never had that problem shooting with, I guess, just manual flashes. I think when I switched from, because when I was shooting on Canon, I had whatever the 580EX, whatever it is, whatever that flash was.
Yeah.
And I was like, this isn't bad. It does the job. But for some reason, I don't know if the metering modes were off on my 5D Mark II at the time, but it was wildly inconsistent when I would shoot TTL and give me bad results. Like, I did not like them. So I just switched over to shooting a manual to avoid any potential issues. And then once I just learned that, and then once I switched over to Fuji, luckily because I was still shooting a manual, everything's I still use the same flashes and everything when I switched
Yeah,
over to Fuji, that it all worked.
when you can shoot manually, like either with the camera or with your flash, you don't need to you don't need to like figure out new stuff. Like I shoot manual flash in wedding receptions, things like that. If I'm doing portraiture,
Hmm.
like I meter and I will use the same settings on the flashes and I set up for the reception room. I rarely use TCL anymore, but yeah, it's the same thing. My problems with the flash units are generally like syncing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, like between different units or like whatever the like things that are in there. Also, like I use like Flashpoint slash Godox
Hmm.
flashes. Their round head flash has an LED light on it, like so you
Like a
can
modeling
like a
light.
modeling flash. And trying to figure out how you manipulate. Like I couldn't figure out how to turn the damn thing on.
Uh,
I first got it, I was just like, okay, it's in the menu. Like you can kind of turn it on, but like when you change the power, you have to like, go into the menu and like
on the
use the
camera?
dial. Yeah, and use the dial and like to up the power. And I was like,
Yeah.
you can do it fairly quickly once you know how to do it. But like if you didn't know, like you
Like you had to
it,
buy a new camera the day before a wedding and figure all this
yeah,
out. Yeah.
yeah. If you have to do it in a very quick way, you just picked it up and were like, oh, I'm going to do this. No, you're not going
Right,
to figure
right,
it out.
right.
I measure things on how intuitive they are, which that's part of why I just pick something up and start using it and see how well, like, see how much I can figure out on my own.
Yeah. I bought a few years ago when the Western Digital came out with some sort of like a Wi-Fi hard drive or something, but it had an SD card reader built in, so you could ingest those photos onto the hard drive. And I thought, this is great. This will save me a ton of time on my way home from a wedding. Ingest those photos, get home, plug in the hard drive. Now they're all there. And I was like you. I was like, this has got to be intuitive. It's got to be easy to figure out. There was, I think, only two buttons. One was power. No, I'm sorry. There was only one button. One was power, and then through a series of clicks, you could also ingest the images, but they made it way too complicated. And like, I think it was, if you do 2 clicks, you can ingest it into like individual folders for the card. If you do 3, anyway, I tried figuring this thing out, and for the life of me, I could not. And I made like a YouTube, like a review video on it. And everybody was like, this is all your fault. All you had to do was read the manual. And I was thinking to myself, like, you shouldn't have to for something as easy, like there's no screen on it.
Right.
You shouldn't have to be able to do that. Anyway, I get you. I totally understand. Can,
I'm still looking for something like that. What you're talking about, that a device like that that I can use to ingest onto a drive.
yeah,
Like, his Narbox is not good,
no.
and I had just got scammed on Kickstarter.
From the
Um,
Narbox?
no, from a different company that was like, and the thing was, it was cheap.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, here's a 500 gig solid state, and you can just plug SD cards into it or whatever. They can copy them onto the hard drive. And I was like, okay, this sounds good. I will invest in this
Yeah.
just to see, like, if it actually works. I don't need all of the bells and whistles. I just need something that's going to back up stuff. The project was fully funded, has not updated in 4 months
Oh,
since.
no.
Like they have not even posted an update, and it's just like, I think these guys just took the money and disappeared.
Oh, dang. That sucks because to
Yeah, because
get
they
so
made like,
excited about being able to fill a need that you have, that's like,
right,
here's the pain point. This would be wonderful if somebody could do it.
yeah, yeah, and it's like they got like 50 grand, and then they just took off.
I'm sorry to hear that. That is rough. That is rough.
Yeah, it's like, not real happy about it. But
Can I
it happens.
tell you about one of the worst days that I ever had as a wedding photographer?
Absolutely.
I have two, and one of them I shared actually on the podcast where I got into a minor accident on the way to a wedding, and this wedding was like 4 hours away, and another car rear-ended me, and I got out and was like checking damage and stuff. Took my cameras out of the back of the car, left them on the side of the road, continued driving the remaining 3 hours to this wedding. Didn't realize that I left my cameras until I had got there and opened up the hatch and realized, oh, there's nothing in here. Like I left my cameras on the side of the road. And because of that accident, I was late for the wedding. There was also a time change, so I was extra late for the wedding. Real bad day. Real bad day. And then the other one was I don't think I've ever talked about this on the podcast because it's like really traumatic. I had a stomach bug that just came on during a wedding day so hard and so fast that it was unreal. Like I've never had any experience like this before, or still to this day in my life, where I'm perfectly fine, and then within 10 minutes of feeling perfectly fine, I mean, you're like hunched over a toilet because you feel like so bad, so bad. Now, luckily, the good part about that was it was right as dinner started, so not terrible. I had some time to figure out what I was going to do. The bad part was this venue was like, there was like an upstairs and a downstairs. Upstairs was kind of like admin stuff for the venue. There was also like a small getting ready room, which nobody really used. But then there were also a bathroom. Downstairs, the bathroom, which was for all the guests, was being remodeled. Why?
Ooh.
There was
Yeah.
there was no access to the men's restroom downstairs. There was only women's restroom. And I think everybody was just like, we're just going to use this as like a community bathroom or whatever. But I was terrified because I'm not feeling good. I don't want
Right.
to, So I went upstairs to use the bathroom, which I'm guessing, again, was like the admin bathroom. And it was open and it was available. The problem was the bride also didn't want to use the bathroom downstairs. So she went upstairs to go use the bathroom right as I got done being very sick, like violently sick. and she like knocked on the door, and I felt terrible because bodily
This,
fluids don't smell very well, I guess. No,
no, and
they
this
don't. Yeah.
reminds me of another story that someone else told me
Oh
that
no.
that was pretty bad. Like they ate something at the wedding that was either bad or whatever, and had to
Go use the
to
restroom.
go use the bathroom,
Sure.
and it was quite bad,
Oh
and
no.
like it was just like, yeah, and they're trying to figure out how to like actually had to figure out how to try to clean their pants.
Oh no.
Yeah, at the wedding,
At the
at the
wedding.
wedding.
At the
Yeah,
wedding. That's why you always bring two pairs of pants to a wedding. Always. That's one thing that I did almost from the beginning. And I think it was because one of the wedding photography podcasts that I listened to most was PhotoBizX. And that was one of the things that was shared on there many times, was how many times people either rip their pants or stain their pants. And I was like, I guess it wouldn't be a bad idea to just bring an extra pair of pants with me. So luckily I always had an extra pair of pants, but I didn't soil my pants or anything that day. But there was a gas station just right across the street. So I ran over there real quick and got some, I don't know, some Tylenol or ibuprofen or Pepto. I don't remember what it was, but like I probably just bought all three and then just took them all at once because I felt so bad. And I thought to myself, I was like, what am I going to do for the rest of this wedding? Because I feel legitimately terrible. And I kid you not, it only lasted about like 30 minutes and then it was just over and I never felt anything again. So I don't know what happened to me, but it was a terrible experience. And I'll never forget the look on the bride's face when I opened up the door to let her into the restroom and how bad I
oh
felt.
shoot.
And I've never talked to her again ever since then. So I don't even think that she honestly responded to the email that I sent. Like when I sent their photos, not a thanks or anything. I really ruined that potential relationship. But good. Well, now we know that we are human and we have
Indeed.
bad wedding experiences. For those who are listening and maybe they're not aware, can you tell us how you got into weddings in the first place, and tell us a little bit about the podcast as well?
Well, I got into weddings a little over 20 years ago. My friends from college started getting married, and I would go with my film camera, and I'd take a couple of rolls of black and white film, and I'd shoot some things that I just thought were interesting on the day of while I was there as a guest, and I'd blow up a couple of photos to like 8x10s and send them to them as an additional gift for the wedding. And people started coming back to me saying like, "Wow, these are better than the guy we hired to do photos."
That feels good.
And I was like, "Oh, that feels nice." Ooh, pat myself on the back, and then I was like, "Oh, maybe I should look into this as something to do for a living." I was an actor at that point, and my photography business was mostly was doing photos professionally. I was doing headshots and like band photos in New York City. So I went on Craigslist because that's what you did back in the
Of
day,
course.
and looked for people who were looking for a wedding photographer. And I put up an ad saying like, "Hey, I've never shot a wedding before, but I have taken photos, and here's my little website, and horrible whatever looking thing, from back then." And said, "If you want to hire somebody who hasn't done this before, I'm gonna be honest about it, but I'm happy to show up and take some photos for you." And I did my first wedding. I really fell in love with it. I fell in love with like there is a performative nature to it,
Yeah.
so it felt like theater to me in the sense of you have a script in a bit and like how your timeline's going to go, but you're improvising a lot throughout the day as well. Yeah, and that's how I sort of like fell into wedding photography, and now I've shot like closing in on 800 weddings now.
My gosh.
Um, getting no, probably next year I'll hit 800. And oh yes, I'm also the host of the Nerdy Photographer podcast. And yeah, it's just like a fun way for me to talk to other photographers and like talk about things that I find are important, both in being running a photography business, because I think that as creatives, we sort of don't think well about the business aspect of things. We're always sort of like thinking about like, oh, what's the best way to capture images and edit stuff and whatever. Like, and there's not a lot of like focus on running a business. So but I try to do that stuff in an entertaining way and not just write this down. Here are 5 steps that you need. Just take a fun approach to it. And the podcast does not take itself so seriously as to, think that, we're the end all be all of photography and that you absolutely must abide by everything that is said on it. It's more of a labor of love and wanting to help people grow
Hmm.
their photography business.
It's a very fun podcast to listen to because, as you said, it doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think that oftentimes in the world of, I guess, business education is very predominant. It's very serious. You have to take yourself very seriously. You have to be a professional. You have to wear a tie every day that you show up to your computer and work. So no, it's lots of fun. But you have interviewed quite a number of photographers about a lot of things related to weddings, related to business. So not only with your insight of shooting 800 weddings, but also with the guests that you have interviewed as well, I figured you're the perfect person to chat with today about how to be a bad wedding photographer, because we hear of some crazy, crazy things. So how does that sound?
That sounds absolutely wonderful. I'm stoked. I am really excited to be a part of this. I'm jazzed to be on the show.
Yeah, and I alluded to it earlier, but we also have a surprise non-human guest at the end of this who's also going to share some tips with us that I know is going to help as well. So when we had chatted about this a little bit before, you had shared a few tips with me, and I think the first one was not bringing any sort of backup gear or having a failure at a wedding and you have to stop shooting. So it sounded like you already shared a little bit about this with your flash at that wedding, but can you share a little bit more and maybe how we avoid this issue as well?
I think that the problem that happens for a lot of photographers or wedding photographers, especially when they're starting out, is that they don't have a lot of gear necessarily. And cameras are expensive.
Hmm.
And it feels like a burden to have multiple camera bodies or to have all this stuff, but you absolutely need to have a backup. And I've seen online forums are a great place to just kind of like drive yourself crazy. I saw somebody had commented, I think this was on Reddit, where it said you need to have a backup camera, and someone said, "I've got my phone," and I was just
Oh
like,
no.
oh no, no. You do not want to have to be forced into a situation where you're shooting with your phone.
Mm.
Somebody's wedding. I know that there have been the two main
Yeah, people who have
websites.
done it as
Oh,
a.
I shot a this wedding entirely on an iPhone. What they
Oh,
don't
you know
tell
who it
you is,
was? It was Stephen Van Elk, actually.
yes, he did it.
Yeah,
But there have been other people who did it.
yeah.
But like
Doing it on
there were,
purpose is very different than being
yeah.
forced to do it.
There's also an element. I don't know if Steve did this. Like there were other people taking photos
Yeah.
with cameras, with other like pro cameras, and it's just funny. I think the first time I ever saw that, I can't remember who it was who posted on one of those big websites. Like, I shot a wedding on an iPhone, and it's like this was like an iPhone like 4 or whatever it was. I don't know. It was a while ago, and like you see in the backgrounds of some of these shots, like there are 3 other photographers
Yeah.
with cameras. Like you didn't go out there, don't you're putting yourself out there as like I shot this on an iPhone. No, you decided to like make this a gimmick,
Hmm.
and you've got other photographers there who are capturing images that you're going to deliver, but you're like, I'm shooting this with my iPhone. Like you don't trust yourself to do it with just an iPhone. My thing is like I think that people will get, like I said, worried about having spending money on extra gear. Find out where you can rent something, or just pick up a used body of something like similar. Like they're out there. It doesn't have to be top of the line. Just need to have something
Hmm.
as a backup in case things go wrong. For me, when I go to a wedding, I have my 2 main bodies that I shoot with. I have a backup body as well, and I have redundant gear.
Hmm.
I have enough lenses that I can pick from if something were to happen. If there's a failure, I can work around that and have other lenses to shoot with. It's when I get really, I'm not going to say frustrated, I'm going to say scared for the wedding couples when I see people saying, like, I've got my 24 to 70 and my 1 camera body and I'm shooting this wedding and I don't have to take anything else with me.
Right. Like it's all
Because,
pro gear. So why do I need to?
right,
Yeah.
right. Why do I need an extra one? Because things go wrong.
Hmm.
And it's not always like, oh, the camera is going to stop working or the lens is going to stop working. It's like somebody could bump into you and break that lens or something. Like those are, people go, well, that's why you have insurance. Yeah, but is insurance going to replace it at the wedding?
Immediately. Yeah.
Um, I'm I'm team UV filter
Hmm.
for that reason. Some people are like, why should I put a piece of glass between my $3,000 lens and my camera and my subject? Well, don't buy a cheap UV filter. But
Right.
like I've had it happen where I was at a wedding. Somebody told me recently, they said like, well, if that happened and it busted my glass, I would just get the glass replaced. And I'm like, I've been at a wedding where a worker was carrying a pipe and turned, and it went right under the lens hood of my 70 to 200 and smashed the UV filter. And it was hanging on the side, like hanging on my hold fast double harness. It wasn't like I was had it up like I was
Ready to
shooting with it.
shoot. Yeah.
He was behind me. He turned, and the pipe went underneath the lens hood and hit that UV filter and smashed it.
Oh my
But
gosh.
I was able to unscrew the UV filter
Uh-huh.
and shoot the rest of the day like that. Like I am team pro UV filter.
Pro
But
UV
if you
filter.
look into renting like this, and if you're just starting out, add this into your pricing so that you're not like, because I mean, it's not that expensive to rent another body and maybe a lens for the weekend
I
when you
use
have a shoot.
there's a camera rental place close to me, cameralensrentals.com. Not sponsored or anything. But I always use them and they've been great. But yeah, I remember thinking to myself how surprisingly affordable it was because I think it was only $60 to rent at the time. It was like a 5D Mark III and maybe like an 85 or 50 or something for the day. And that was it. And I thought for $85, like, could you imagine the alternative? And breaking a
Yeah,
lens, breaking a camera, or it just fails. And
and
what do
yeah,
you do?
you have to think about your client
Yeah.
and what are you doing for your client. If something happens and you are unable to capture more images, whatever, they're not going to have those photos.
Hmm.
They're not gonna, like, this is not something you can like just redo, and it all lands on you.
Yeah. Oh,
Uh,
100%. Yeah.
that is the unfortunate nature of the business, is that it comes back to you if that goes wrong. And
And maybe you're the kind of person who, like, just imagine the embarrassment that you would have to go up to a couple and be like, so my camera's dead, but it's okay because I have an iPhone and I'm just going to take pictures for the rest of
yeah,
the day. Like,
with
there's
an
no
iPhone,
situation in which they would think to themselves, oh, okay,
that's
well, then
great.
that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So if
Hmm.
that's your main motivator is embarrassment, just think about that and just spend the 60 or $80 or whatever. Get yourself
Yeah,
a rental.
and it's just peace of mind also that you're getting. You'll I don't know. I am an anxious person, and the thought of not being able to perform my duty,
Terrifying.
yeah, it terrifies me.
Yeah.
It's just, like, now I'm over way, way, way overcompensated as far as like having the gear there that I need to do the job.
Yeah. So then just quickly, what would you say, like if somebody's shooting, like if they're within their first, I don't know, 5, 10 weddings, what's kind of
Mm.
like the minimum?
I always say 24 to 70, 70 to 200, and a 50.
Hmm. And then two camera
Uh,
bodies should be good to
two
go.
camera bodies. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that like I think at this point in my career, I could probably shoot an entire wedding with those still
Hmm.
and feel comfortable with it. Might not necessarily artistically get the things that I want to at this point, but I think that you give yourself a lot of options, and especially if you're still just starting out. Like those, a nifty 50, 24 to 70, and 70 to 200 will cover 98% of what you need.
Perfect.
Especially if you're starting out, that's the golden triangle of lenses.
Yeah, right. Perfect. All right. So I got one here, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. And I wrote down, assuming that you're Henri Cartier-Bresson, right?
Hmm.
And think that everything that you create is gold, and think that the couple is hiring you for your artistic excellence, and then therefore being kind of closed off to taking any sort of suggestions from the couple. Have you seen this before?
I have not experienced it in person. I have definitely seen it online, or actually in a workshop that I was
Really?
part of once, where somebody was like, this person was just saying like, they're not hiring you to just like, they're hiring you to be the photographer and be the artist. And I was like, mm,
Not always.
yeah, like, let me raise my hand here. They're trying to, they want to get what they want. And while there is certainly something to be said for your artistic eye, and normally people will say like, oh, I really like how you see things, to me, even when they're coming in for their first meeting or call or whatever. I always ask like, what was it about my work that you saw and got you interested in contacting me? But I feel like weddings are a very collaborative experience. While there are times where I will put my 2 cents in and say like, yeah, I don't know if you want to do that, if that's like plausible. And there's a difference between managing expectations,
Hmm.
which I think is something you really have to do as a wedding photographer, because sometimes people will be like, I want this. And you're like, huh. I recall, like, actually, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that. I was at a wedding and it was very fancy venue. And we had a lot of time before the ceremony for photos with the wedding party. And I had already talked to the couple about what they wanted, what was important to them, and with the style of the photos. And we were sort of in the middle of doing photos with the wedding party, and one of the bridesmaids says, "Let's do a Vogue shoot." And I was like, "Excuse me, what do you mean?" She's like when they have those like Annie Leibovitz fold out like covers of Vogue, and I was just like, well, we don't have the gear for that. Like,
Yeah, no
I don't
kidding.
have the lighting equipment set up for that. I would need like would need more people here.
She's just
And a lot of
discounting the amount of work that Annie Leibovitz puts into a
yeah,
Vogue
that I'm just going
cover
to throw
shoot.
that out there.
Yeah.
You know, be able to put that together. We have 10 minutes. Yeah, just like let's do a Vogue shoot. And I was just like, nope, that's
Yeah.
not going to happen. That's not, we're not gonna be able to do that. But I think that like that's something you need to discuss beforehand
Hmm.
with couples. You like a part of my process is to ask a lot of questions, and I think that that's really important to ask a lot of questions going into it because you get a better sense of what the couple likes
Hmm.
and how you can make your style fit what they like
Yes.
is like that there's a difference between just going in and saying like I know the best. I have one of those things of like this style of photographer because there are a lot of them out there. It's the people who just want to like put I do my same 5 shots every wedding. That type of photographer like you pose everybody the same way doing this whatever like we're gonna get these 5 shots and they're very beautiful photos, but do you think that all of your couples want to have the same 5 pictures as everybody else?
Hmm.
And it's just sort of like maybe get to know them a little bit better and find things that express their personality and their uniqueness and what's unique about their wedding day. Finding things in there that help bring out their aesthetic and personality and make it blend with yours.
Yeah.
That's my
Yeah.
personal approach.
Yeah. I've always felt the same way where it's like at a wedding, you are there to support the wedding, not take it over, I guess, which I think a lot of wedding photographers like early on feel like that's their job. And I think that it is because they think I'm being hired for my artistic eye or whatever. So my input is very important. And I had seen once I don't remember where it was. Maybe it was Reddit. Maybe it was another forum or something where somebody had asked, they're like, I'm shooting a wedding. It's at like 2 p.m. in the afternoon, very bright, summer day outside. How do I avoid things like overexposed sky and stuff? And somebody suggested, obviously, they helped out with the sky recommendation, but then they said also ask the bride to wear maybe like a cream colored dress. And I thought to myself, who
What?
are you to tell a bride
What to wear?
what to wear on her wedding day? Yeah, exactly. And for something so special as a dress, right? Like, imagine that it's her grandmother's dress, and you come in and you're like, that's
Yeah.
not going to work. Like,
I'm
how
sorry,
terrible
but
that would
I'm just
be.
not going to be able to shoot your wedding because you didn't choose the right color dress.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
The advice that some photographers have is yeah,
Yeah. It's
you
sort
just
of like
gotta realize you're not Picasso, you're not at that level, you're there to support everything. And
and the thing is, even if you were like, there's an element of, like I said before, you're working with these people,
yep.
and they're not just like mannequins that you're arranging how you want. Like, this is a these are living human beings,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of emotion and things caught up in a wedding day that you have to navigate as well as not just. It's about more than just taking the pictures too. It's like, and I think that sort of attitude, I don't know. I think it is a pitfall that's easy to kind of fall into when you're starting out.
Hmm.
Like, once you know enough to be dangerous, I think is the like you have enough skill or enough ability to like think that you know everything that you need to know
Hmm.
that you can fall into that. I've seen people who should know better who behave in similar ways, but yeah, you have to work with people. You have to work. This is definitely a collaborative art form.
Right, right. Okay, so then the next thing that I wrote down is that so that was assuming taking no input from your couples, right? That's a bad thing to do. The next bad thing that I wrote down is taking too much input from your couples for every single decision. This can be a bad thing.
Oh, Yeah, you have to have the confidence. Like I said, I think the biggest thing when this is an issue is managing expectations, because like I had a bride who was still in the chair getting her makeup done and was on Pinterest, like
Looking for
scrolling
photos ideas?
yeah, looking for photo ideas, and she's like, "Oh, what about this one? This is great." And I'm like, "Those people are on a beach. You're getting married in New York City."
In a hotel. Yeah. In the basement
No,
of a hotel. Yeah.
no, it's just like we've already talked about like what we want to get. Like, put the phone down,
Yeah.
start enjoying your day, and not like you don't have to say yes to everything.
Hmm.
I think that's you find a balance and you collaborate with them, but you also have to know what is going to work for them and how. I've had so many people say like, "Oh, we're gonna." It's especially a thing in the city, like knowing how long it's going to take to get to a location, especially on a weekend, like when traffic is going to be bad, or like things like kind of balancing all that stuff together. And I will have people say like, "Okay, we're going to start," and then for people who aren't in New York, it might be difficult to visualize this, but just very quickly, they'll say, "We're starting the ceremonies in Midtown Manhattan. Then we want to go over to Brooklyn afterwards, drive over the Brooklyn Bridge, do some photos so we can see the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan skyline. And we're going to do all our wedding party photos and photos of us up there. Then we're going to drive back into Manhattan for like, we're going to go to Central Park and get some photos there. And then
And
we're
then Times
going,
Square. And
yeah, they're going to do Times Square and this stuff. And then we're going to go, like, then we're going back out to Brooklyn to where the reception venue is." And I'm just like, yeah, this is not going to work. Your timing, even if you did all the Manhattan stuff first, man, like each of those things, like, and I run into this a lot when it comes to city weddings. And like people are like, "Oh, I want to do Central Park," and I'm like, "Well, what part of Central Park?" Because it determines how far you have to. There's no driving through and just like parking and like jumping out.
Mhm.
You have to walk to these locations.
Mm.
Like, and if you have to park somewhere, there's no real parking anywhere nearby. If you've got a bus, like your party bus, whatever, is like driving up and they can maybe stop and like let people out or whatever. But then we have to walk to that location or like getting to those are like, that is, I think, the biggest input that I necessarily have regularly, where I tell people not no, but like we need to work on what's the most important things that you want here and like really pare this down to what is feasible to
Yeah.
do. Because I think if you just start saying yes to everything that they say, you can end up like in a world of trouble because they're looking to you to be the professional and know what can be done.
Hmm.
And sometimes you'll get like I said, like, I'm sure you've experienced this where people like come up with their like, "Oh, this is my idea board for my wedding. I love this photo. I love this. I want to get something like this." And I'm not really, when somebody shows me a picture that someone else took and says like, "Yeah, I want to get something like this," I think that's fine. I don't really care that we'll use it as inspiration. I'm not going to recreate somebody else's picture, but I am going to try to make it my own and give you something similar that reflects who the couple is,
Of course.
uh, and not just remake something. But yeah, you need to learn to say no
I think
where it's appropriate.
for one of my first weddings, I remember asking my couple, and I think that this came down to just trying to provide like a good service, right? Like I wanted to prove that I was knowledgeable in wedding photography and that I could receive what it was that they wanted. And so I asked the couple questions like, what are your favorite colors? What are, just all these things. So in the hopes that then I could make the wedding super personalized for them. But I even asked them questions like, I would show them different edits of photos and be like, do you like
Oh,
A or B, A or B? And then from there I'd go, like the eye test or whatever. Again, it was in good nature to
yeah,
want to make this wedding the best and most personal that it can be for them. But it was just such a terrible idea because now it sucked all of the joy that I found in photography out, because now I'm literally just the person pressing a button because I get to provide no artistic input and I just have to follow their list of instructions. And it was
yeah.
real bad.
I always like to say to couples like, if you love my work, set me free.
That's great.
There,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to work with you. You can trust me, and you got to build that trust. But like, you can trust me to capture. Like, yes, you don't have to send me saying like, "Get the first kiss
Hmm.
after the ceremony." I'm gonna shoot that. Like, I'm gonna take pictures of you walking down the aisle. Like those things, yes, like standard. I always tell people if there's something that you think is outside of the norm,
Mm-hmm.
or there are people that you want photos of, those are the sort of questions that I gear things towards. Are you doing some sort of exit? Is there some sort of special part of the ceremony that I need to know about? Like
Mm-hmm.
there was one time where people were like, oh, we're going to have like a sword fight in the middle of the first dance.
You're like, thank you for telling me. I needed to know
Yeah, it
this.
was
Yeah.
like they were Renaissance. It was a Renaissance fair wedding, and there's like, yeah, okay, need to know about that. Like, it's great. Like, I need to. Those are the things that I help me take better pictures
Mm-hmm.
because I'm prepared. But there's also like things where I might say like, hey, when you're staging this, try to put it here because it's going to look better. Like the background is going to be better for the photos than if you're doing it facing this way. So those are things we work together. It's still a collaboration. But yeah, if you get too much into saying yes to everybody, then I did some similar things. Like you're talking about like the different edits. I remember like when I was starting out, the vintage look was real popular.
Mm-hmm.
Like the sort of like
Sepia, a little bit
sepia
glow around
toning.
the edges.
No, not that. I never did selective color. What I'm talking about is like it's sort of like it has like a old filmy look to it, but it's like kind of like blue and orange tones
Uh,
or whatever. Those sorts of, but like muted and like, and I would tell people like, okay, because I was like, I have like 4 different Photoshop actions. This is before like presets were a thing.
that was hundreds of dollars worth of Photoshop actions, by the way.
Yes, it
Yes.
was. Yeah, and so you want to use them, and it'd be like, okay, so which of these 4 do you prefer? Which do you think is best? And they'd tell me or whatever, and then I'd look at it and go like, oh, yeah, that doesn't work with the photo. Like it doesn't like those
Shoot
like
yourself in the foot.
yeah, you
Yeah.
just like you don't. It doesn't work with every picture.
Mm-hmm.
So
So how do you get over that?
I think get over just saying yes to people,
Yeah,
or
I guess realizing who you are as a, I don't know, artist, for lack of a better term.
mm, that's tough. I think that is probably one of the tougher things that you're gonna have to do, no matter what type of photography you're in, is having the confidence in your own skills and your knowledge of what's going on, or that if you don't know, and I think this is the thing that people really should pay attention to, if you don't know, find out, research, ask questions, tell people, tell the couple, like, listen, I don't know about this.
Mm-hmm.
Like if somebody says, like, oh, we're gonna do a skydiving, like we're gonna skydive, you're gonna come with us and you're gonna take pictures while you're skydiving. And you're just like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Then you're like, wait, I need a like I can't just like hold my camera
Right.
while I'm skydiving. You're like you take that moment and be like, listen, I'm happy to put in the work and research this and figure out whether or not this is doable. One of the things that I think this is very important is when it comes to people's safety, your safety and the couple's safety. There will be times when people are like, let's do a photo on this particular like location that is not safe.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've paid attention to the photography world long enough, these stories crop up all the time about like how there was one that was really horrible. I remember where like the groom fell into a river and drowned like on
Oh
his wedding day
no.
because they were trying to get this photo like on a rock in the middle of a river next to like a waterfall, and like he slipped off and the photographer was like, oh yeah, we can totally get that. Like you have to have the sense to, like, yes, stand up and say, listen, this is not safe.
Mm-hmm.
It's not safe for you. Yeah, you have to be willing to say that I either know better or that I am not sure, but I don't think this is feasible.
Right.
It's hard. It is really like it is one of the harder things because I mean, even like I said, almost 800 weddings and 22 plus years into this, there's still times when the imposter syndrome kicks in, and I'm like, do I really know best? Um,
Who am I to
yeah,
tell this couple what they can and can't do on their wedding day? If they want to go stand on a rock, what am
yeah.
I to say no?
That sort of thing, like I am very confident in, but there are some times where
Yeah.
people say like, oh, we want to get this photo, and I'm like, it's not my personal taste. Who am I to tell them I don't like jumping photos? Yeah, or let's pose like there's a Tyrannosaurus Rex like, following me, and I've done a few of those
Yeah.
like over the years, just because like it's you want to do this, like
Mm-hmm.
that's your thing, and I don't feel artistically compromised for having done that. But I have put my foot down on things that weren't safe. People wanted to like go into a building that was like, oh, we can just slide through this fence
Oh.
and go in here. And I'm like, no, No, it's not. That's
There's a
not
fence for a reason. Yeah.
right. Like these things are like there are warning signs literally in some of these places like for a reason.
Okay, so next one, let's see. You sent in another one here, and I thought this one was good because we live in a world now where lighting is relatively easy and it is cheap, and you can go on Amazon and spend $100 and get a really good quality light, if you're just getting started. And ring lights are pretty popular. So the allure of being able to just bring a battery powered ring light and use that as your sole source of light throughout a wedding seems awesome.
In theory, maybe someone who's unaware. Like this was actually a story that came to me from a friend of mine. He said, "You're not going to believe this. What's going on at this wedding?" And he sent me a picture, and I was like, "Oh, he's just doing that. Like the photographer's just doing that during portraits, right?" He's like, no,
A ring light, what was mounted to the camera?
like he holding it
Oh, he had like
the
a
whole
boom
time.
pole with a ring light
No,
on
no,
it.
no, no. Handheld, ring light, and camera all day.
Oh, so difficult.
And yeah, so difficult. And I think back, that made me think back to like, I don't know if you remember like Orbis flash and like the Z flash attachments that you could have to make a ring flash like out of your like on camera flash.
Yeah,
I think I still have my Orbis flash.
they were
Um,
relatively small though. They were like 6 or 9 inches, right?
yeah,
The
and it
circle.
was just, and it just, you could get that ring flash look with the flash from with your on camera flash, your regular speed light. But this guy was carrying like a battery powered like ring light that people will use to do TikToks or Instagram reels or whatever. And my guess is that he thought like, well, people really love this ring light look,
Uh-huh.
and so let's do that for weddings. Yeah, no, it doesn't look good because the issue there is like you need to know how different types of light work, and like an LED ring light does not cast light very far.
Right.
Those sorts of things, and like when you're learning, and I always, what is it? Oh man, I'm trying to remember there's a concept in like diminishing amount of light output.
The
I'm
inverse
trying to,
square law.
yes, that is exactly
Yeah,
it. Trying to
love
think
that
of the
one.
words. The inverse square law, which if you're doing any sort of lighting, you need to kind of understand. And it's one of those things whenever I try to explain it, I feel like I'm turning into a beautiful mind, just like
Yes.
writing numbers all over the place in my head. He's a different amount, the power of light. And I was watching, it was Rob Hall. He was doing a video about, there's a lot of videos about light gear and techniques. And he was saying how, like LED is not nearly as powerful as flash. Like, yeah, great for like video and like having a constant light source. Like, but it's not good at like capturing. Does not have enough output.
Hmm.
I think he was talking about like basically one of those like light wands.
Oh yeah.
It has like it's a 20 watt or whatever LED, super bright
Super bright and
LED.
20 watts. Yeah.
Yeah, 20 watts,
My light
which
bulb in my house is 60 watts, and
exactly. And I mean, the wattage is not necessarily whatever watt seconds, but like it turns out to be like whatever, like a regular speed light is like a sixth or an eighth, like low power on
yeah.
a regular speed light, and you think, oh, okay. And if you want to do things, if you're shooting a wedding, and one of the things that happens at weddings is like dancing, people are moving around. If you want to get like photos of people moving around and you want to get a freeze that action, you really need to use a flash. I think one of the things about lighting when you're starting out as a photographer is it can seem really overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be.
Hmm.
And my suggestion is get yourself a speed light, practice with it, get used to bouncing it, and things like that. Especially if you're shooting weddings, you're gonna it's another tool to add to the toolbox. I think a lot of people fall victim to. I'm a natural light photographer. And the reason that they stick to that so hard is because they're unsure about flash or think that flash is going to look bad, though there is a trend in this sort of like bad flash is coming back. I don't know if you've seen these sort of
No,
like,
just like straight on camera,
yep,
blasted at the
it
couple.
is becoming like we've kind of burned through that weird color grading and out of focus trends
Uh,
last year.
thank
And
goodness.
now the trend is sort of like, and it was starting last year. Now the trend is like this sort of like very flat,
Mm-hmm.
direct flash.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's becoming a thing. And then you know what? That's really easy to do.
Yeah, that's about as easy
I
as it
just,
gets.
yeah, I mean, I put like a little diffuser on the end of my flash and just point it directly at a couple if you want that.
The
But
problem is 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years
sure.
from now, 20 years from now, when these couples are looking at their wedding photos, they're going to look so dated. It's not good. And that's an issue that I find a lot with wedding photographers, is that there are trends within the industry that people just go nuts for. And they do look good in that moment. You look at that photo and you're like, that's a good photo. But as a whole, maybe as the whole wedding, it doesn't work. And then it just falls out of date so quickly that the couple is going to realize it when they look at their photos in the future, in the same way that we look at maybe our parents' prom photos or their wedding photos and we think, whoa, what happened here?
Yeah, and there's something to be said for like you can't change the fashion of the times or whatever. But my goal has been, I think, since about year 5 that I was doing weddings, I made a very distinct decision
Mm-hmm.
to not let trends rule my business, whether that be an editing style or like particular photos, like I mentioned, like jumping photos or the running from a T-Rex or
Yeah.
a UFO shot. Like I'm not just like chasing every trend out there, because I try to capture things in a timeless manner, but more specifically as it happened,
Mm-hmm.
like looks like how it happened. I have created my own presets that I edit my photos with, but it's not so removed from reality. I want people to like look back on it and like still be in that moment. So that same thing, like 20 years from now, or whatever, they're not looking back on it. It's something I actually say to couples when they ask me what my style is, and I say it's yes. I don't want you to look at these in 20 years and go like, wow, that was so 2023.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, why did we do that? It looks like an Instagram filter. Yeah, and it takes work, and I think that it's very easy to succumb to trends because trends can get you traction
Mm-hmm.
in some ways, get people to like see your work. But there's a way of like, I'm trying to think of the words specifically, a way of balancing how your approach to marketing yourself with what you're providing for your client. I've found that reels on Instagram, like creating a reel is different than like I'm going to just use filters and things to provide valued content, value add content, whatever, like as opposed to like just either it's something you can laugh at or it's something you're going to learn from.
Yeah. It's either, what is it, educational or entertaining,
You're
right?
right.
Yeah.
And as opposed to like, I'm just doing this because everybody's doing it. And that gets, oh, yeah, I'm just going to hop on the trend so that I can get more views.
Like, could you imagine being the photographer who, like, every wedding you're known for doing that T-Rex shot? And
The
because
best
people
one.
aren't really doing that photo anymore. People aren't going to come into you
Yeah.
after 6 months looking
Right.
for that photo. It's going to get old real quick. So
Right.
try to come up with
And then
something
like,
that is just a bit more timeless.
like in the first one, the first person who did it, and then I find it very, Sasha, I can't remember his name. He's a New York photographer. He had done a photo where like this couple was on the street in New York City, and Zach Braff was like walking past them and looking at them, and he's like, "Hey," and like makes a face and like points at them, like, "Oh yeah, whatever,"
Yeah.
and it blew up and like every like went viral, and his response was Sasha King, I think maybe is the photographer's name, but he was saying like, "How much work did you get from that?" He's like, "Zero.
Right. Right.
I didn't get any jobs because of that." I think probably the same thing could be said for the first person who did that T-Rex photo. Like it got a lot of attention, but it didn't like it doesn't give you a steady income
Mm-hmm.
for a long time. Like you said, after 6 months or a year or so of doing those, like people aren't looking for that shot. They're
Yeah.
looking for the next trend. And are you just going to chase trends your entire career? I think that's a dangerous road to go down because you're going to end up feeling like in 5 years, like what am I doing
Mm-hmm.
and who am I? And you're not going to like feel like any sort of agency in your photography career if all you're doing is like following trends. You can innovate, emulate, or imitate.
Ah.
Those are your 3 choices. I did not come up with that, but so like you can find a new thing to do. You can come up with a new thing, and maybe like there are times when I've done some like shoots that I planned that are like styled shoots, and some of them were I laughed at myself and go like that was way ahead of its time. I took chances. Like I did something like so different. Like I did a photo shoot of bride and bridesmaid dresses on aerialists. So like
Wow.
on the silks and the rings, doing the stuff. I had never seen it done anywhere before, and nobody was interested in publishing it because
Wow.
they had never seen it. Like, it's also like, like, because there was not enough interest, I guess, in that. But I there's some of my favorite photos, but it was just like taking a chance, and like you want to innovate something and be the first to do something, do things that people haven't done before.
Yeah.
I've tried to stay in the emulate and innovate phase as opposed to imitating and just doing what other people do, because like I said, even when you do that, you'll find yourself, if you stay in this for a long time in photography, not just wedding photography, you stay in it long enough, there are going to be times when you go like, you just, your brain is going to turn around and be like, what am I doing?
So it's
Am
safe
I
to say
being
that
myself?
you're not going to emulate putting a ring light on your camera and walk around for the day and use that.
No, but you know what? It might do if somebody's like really into like fashiony looking stuff. I used to do like a photo booth that had a ring light on it
Yeah.
that gave this like very fashion shoot look to it. Yeah, I mean that was, and if somebody likes that sort of look, but I mean I don't think that I'm going to be doing that very flat on camera flash.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is that like everything is a tool, right? For something. Like I'm not going to use, I don't know, a hammer to this is a terrible example. I don't know, install a shower in my house.
Right,
I'm going to use the right tool for the job, but that doesn't mean that a hammer is not a useful tool. Just
right.
understand its uses and when to use it. All right, next one that we got here is I got two. So I kind of went both ways with this, right? So for the first one, it was not taking any advice from your couple, and then it was taking too much advice from your couple. So this
Yeah.
next one, it's kind of the same. It is worrying too much about image quality versus the other
Mm.
components of a wedding day. Because I feel like oftentimes when it comes to shooting a wedding, one thing that holds people back is that they feel like, oh, I don't have the right gear. I have to have tons of stuff, all the best, L lenses if you shoot Canon or whatever. Otherwise, it's not going to work out. And it can, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, like, limitation leads to innovation. I don't tell people, like, like one of the ways you learn, one of the best ways to learn, I find is like, and I just did an interview where we kind of discussed this a little bit on one of my episodes recently. Limit yourself, go out and practice and say like, I'm only going to use this lens and I'm only going to use like these settings. Like I'm however much you choose, like going out and practicing, like I'm only going to shoot at f5 with a 50 millimeter and at ISO whatever, and like then you have to like find the shots where the light works for those settings and things like that, like so you can really have to think, and so that when you find yourself in these situations on the day of a wedding, like you don't need to like, oh, I gotta switch lenses
Mm-hmm.
or I gotta go get different gear to capture this moment. Like I can do it here. I know what I'm gonna do, and you can see those things more clearly because you test yourself outside. I think that one of the things that people don't do is just shoot
Right.
outside of. And I get it because sometimes it feels like work to do it outside of getting paid. And the funny thing is, like, doing it outside of getting paid feels like work. No, go out and shoot. Just like shoot whatever pleases you or whatever. But like, give yourself limitations. I also used to do a thing where I referred to it as, since I started out with film, limiting myself to 24 exposures or 36 exposures
Yeah.
to tell a story. And like people go like, oh, so I'll pick out my 24 or 36. Like, no, it's from start to finish. You only expose, like the shutter only clicks
24
24 or
times. Yeah.
36 times, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all you like. That's all you get to tell your story,
Uh,
and it kind of blows the mind of like younger photographers today to
right.
like think about that sort of limitation
That would be the
because
next TikTok thing where people discover that cameras used to only be able to take 24 or 36 photos. Yeah.
well, I mean, like film has always sort of like been like people they are rediscovering film,
Mm-hmm.
but it's that, yeah, I think widespread, like people who don't shoot film or have never shot film, like don't really get that sort of. When I started out, I had to carry two camera bodies when I was shooting film because I needed to have two different film speeds
Mm-hmm.
just in case. Like you couldn't just dial in a different ISO. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't think you need to feel like, oh, I have to have every little bit of gear to get good photos. Find out what you can do with what you have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's another part of like go out and play with it outside of work and just like get really comfortable with the gear that you have
Yeah.
and know how to use it.
One thing that I like to do for a while until it started getting cold again. So last year was I would challenge myself to go out every single month and do like my own like solo photo walk, I guess. But I would always give myself some sort of challenge before going out. And oftentimes I would find that I would try to give myself a limitation such as like I could only shoot at f8 just so that when you go out, and then I would always stack that I could only take 36 photos as well. Otherwise, because I could be out there for hours,
Right.
trying to take more and more photos. But yeah, it really is interesting to when you're used to shooting at, I don't know, 1.8 because you just got that nifty 50, and then you force yourself to shoot at f8 and
Mhm.
figure out how do you still make a photo look interesting and compelling with so much in focus. Like, what are the other elements that you can incorporate into a photograph to make this photo
You
look
really
good?
have to think about your composition a lot more
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
at that point. Like in that, if you don't have all L series or whatever, 1.2 or 1.4 lenses, and you're shooting at 5.6, whatever you've got, you have to adapt. And like you're shooting, you really have to like be careful about your composition and what you're putting in the frame, because it's not going to get blurred out.
Right.
And so I think there's part of me that considers like yearns for that being put in that sort of situation sometimes. I find myself guilty of at times using the gear, like leaning too heavily on the gear,
Right. Right.
and not always, but like there are times when I do it and I go like, oh, I was just sort of like allowing the camera and the lens to do the work in that scenario. Like I kind of set it up like how I wanted it to be, but then I sort of put it on cruise control for 5 or 10 minutes there. I think,
I think we've all been there. So it's kind of like when you first get started in photography, where you feel like photography is just getting a photo that is properly exposed and somewhat in focus. You're like, I did
yeah,
it. It doesn't even matter what the subject matter is or the moment or the light. Like, it's properly exposed and it's in focus. That's the photo. But it's not until you realize if you can walk into a room or anywhere and get a photo that is properly exposed and relatively in focus, that's when photography starts. It's all those other elements that you start to bring together to create a photo. And it's the same way with gear as well. It's like when you first get started and you think, oh, photography is having the pro gear, having all those great lenses. It's not until you actually get to that point and you have those that you realize, oh, actually, these really don't
so
mean much at all. And I could still get whatever I need with half the amount of gear. And that's a hard thing to understand.
yeah, I think that there are certainly like when I go to a wedding, I pack things mostly. I pack a lot of stuff mostly so I have redundancy,
Hmm.
but I have like certain lenses that I use for a few detail shots. My macro lens, I'm only really using that for like rings and
Right.
some flower shots and things like that. And then it just goes back in my bag, and I'm like, "Ugh." But it does give me capture, like capture things in a way that I want to for those particular images. That's like, do I really need it? No. Does it help me realize my artistic vision for like these dozen shots out of a whole wedding day? Yes, it does. But if I was forced to take it out of my bag, absolutely could.
Hmm.
I just do things slightly differently.
So then,
Uh,
honest question, because I was there as well. It was hard for me to understand why I invested in a macro lens when I was only using it for less than a dozen shots. Why not use extension tubes?
I have those too.
You have
Uh,
both. You use
yeah,
both.
I don't use the extension tubes as much anymore. I do it for like really close. This is just for like personal stuff. Flowers. I love taking pictures of flowers
Ah,
and getting like really close up on the interior of a flower. So that's what I use those for now. I used to use them at weddings occasionally. You can run into some issues with focusing issues if you don't really know how to adjust your extension tubes.
hmm.
I found them sometimes there's a little too much work to get those
Gotcha.
photos. Like they didn't have a lot of time for these pictures. So it was just easier to have a macro lens. And the thing is, I have like 100 millimeter macro.
Hmm.
And if I absolutely needed to, if like something happened to one of my other lenses, that could be a portrait lens if I needed to on the wedding day.
Sure.
There's other things that it can do that I could use it for if I absolutely needed it.
You can't with
So
extension tubes. There's no double
no,
use.
no,
Yeah.
extension tubes only good for one thing.
Only good for one thing. Only good for one. And then that kind of brings us to the next one here, which is the exact opposite, not worrying enough about. Again, this is one of those things where when I had first got started, I thought that it was the camera body that was everything and that the
Mm.
lens could be the afterthought. So you invest the $2,500 into a camera, like the brand new 5D Mark III, like you get so excited, but you're still using the 50 millimeter 1.8 that was 90, $98. Or even doing things like just keeping your shutter speed too low, just so that you can keep your ISO low as well. And again,
Right.
just worrying about those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think that man, I always tell people now, like, invest in the glass.
Yeah.
Like, I've got lenses that I've had for 15 years that I still use. Never had an issue with it. I invested the money in it and continue to use them. They work great. That investment has paid off. But you go through cameras. If you're a professional,
Every few years.
yeah, like every 3-4 years, you're like either you're upgrading or you're sometimes cameras. Like I said, I had an issue with a camera just dying on me. You get to the shutter, especially when you had DSLRs, you've reached the shutter limit. I have mirrorless cameras rated to have a shutter rating. I can't remember. In my
They
head, I think they
do, but
do.
it's like 500,000. Like it's
Yeah,
much
it's a
higher than.
ridiculous amount higher. It's like twice as much as like a DSLR.
Mhm.
Sometimes you reach the end of the life of a camera well before you would reach the end of the life of a
A lens.
lens. I think about the number of cameras I've had over the years versus, like I said, the lenses that I have that I bought when I was like 6 cameras ago that I still use now. I think that, yeah, always invest in the glass first. I think that yes, you can fall victim to like, not thinking that you can do like creating a quality image is not, it does at times require better lighting
Hmm.
or better gear, or like when I think that people like to get effusive about the specs of
I agree.
cameras, and people they go, "Oh, I can go to 128,000 ISO." It's like, "Oh, great," but you should not be shooting.
Yeah, it's not practical at all.
It's not
Yeah.
practical.
A Ferrari
It's
can go
not
like 250 miles an hour. You shouldn't be going that fast on the roads.
right. I mean, there may be like you might own that Lamborghini, and like one time you get to go to a track and get it up going pretty
Hmm.
fast, and then that's the one time of owning it that you get to go that fast. Yeah, it doesn't mean you need to bump your ISO to 128,000
Yeah.
on a regular basis. And honestly, like there have been a couple of times when I've gone up to 32K on my ISO. But the thing is, you do start to lose image quality there. Like, and it's not so much anymore. But there was a time when if you got up to like 4,000 ISO, and like everything just started getting muddy.
Yeah.
You lost color depth.
Started looking
It,
painterly.
yeah,
Yeah.
painterly. Yeah, that's a good term for it. Yeah, you lose. I think so. Knowing what your limitations are and what can help you get a better image, whether it's a lens, the camera body, the lighting. I always find that one of the things that the most often overlooked in that triangle is lighting.
Hmm.
Uh, Even if you have kind of janky gear, really great lighting, you can capture a pretty good image.
That's
Uh,
why you can take a great photo on an iPhone. Like
you
technically,
can,
an
you
iPhone is
can,
terrible as far as specs go, right? Like
yeah,
teeny tiny sensor, terrible lens, horrible ISO performance. But if you get some good light, you're gonna get
right.
yourself a great photo.
There was a series of like shot on iPhone. They
Yeah,
definitely had those.
billboards and
Yeah, yeah, billboards. It was all throughout New York City too, on like subway stations. They'd have these huge posters, and I'd walk by them and I'd look at this and I go, "Huh, you know what? The thing is, I noticed they were all black and whites. First of all, and second was that, like that there was great lighting
Mhm.
in every single one of those photos, whether it was outdoors, like landscape, whatever it was. The one consistent factor was a fantastic lighting.
Yeah,
Sure, I can shoot something on an iPhone, but I need the light to do it.
and that just goes across everything. It's not just iPhone. Like to create a great photo, you
Yeah,
need great light. You need great light.
it's almost as if the term photography
Yeah.
is something
Is that
about
what that
painting with light.
means? Yeah, it's funny. Well, I think it is time that we come to the fun part of the show where
Mm,
we're gonna do some sort of
our special
lightning
guest.
round. Yeah, we have a special guest, and it is everybody's favorite AI chat tool, ChatGPT.
Woo.
You're not going to believe this, but I asked ChatGPT, the sentient mind over there, I said, what are some ways that a wedding photographer can ruin a couple's wedding day? Are you ready to hear what it said?
Sure.
Okay. So the first one was, it was solid. It was being late or just not showing up.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You don't want to do that.
Ding ding, winner.
Yeah.
I'll be on time. I always aim to be half an hour early
Hmm.
because traffic or anything. I mean, I'm like, you had an accident. I've been in a car accident on the way to a wedding. I always aim to be there early because who knows, traffic or whatever. Be on time.
Yeah.
Yeah, not showing up.
If you're there 30 minutes early, though, like, do you go in the 30 minutes early or you just hang out in the car?
I will scout around, I'll look around and like see stuff, and like I will say hi, and I'll be like, I'll start and on in my time,
Yeah.
or I might start a little early. I don't know.
Yeah.
Depends on how I'm feeling, but I mean, I tend to use that time, especially if I'm driving a long distance. I gotta go to the bathroom or like just sort of like get my gear together and all those things so that I'm ready to get started.
Yeah.
If I get there early, and then but then sometimes you, because of whatever reason, you don't manage to get there on time.
Yeah. Last thing you want to do is ruin a bathroom before the bride can go in there. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, you want to use those gas station bathrooms before you show up to the wedding. Okay, so next thing ChatGPT said was the number 2 way that a wedding photographer can ruin a couple's day is to be rude or disrespectful to the wedding party and its
Mm-hmm.
guests. And I was like, that is really insightful, ChatGPT. Good job. So things like
Mm-hmm.
not interrupting the ceremony, disrupting intimate moments between the couple, which I was trying to think about. I guess that would be, just
If they're like off by themselves, like that's one of those things that you'll see people like talking or having a moment together, and I'm always like, I will take a picture of that, but I'm not going to go over there and be like, "Ooh, this looks great."
yeah,
Get
yeah,
a close-up shot of that. Like this is why I have my 70 to 200
yeah.
or whatever lens, so that I can get a shot of this from the distance without having to be in their faces.
Yeah. Even as a wedding photographer, like, you're kind of given a free pass to like ask couples to kiss in front of you and like watch, which is weird. Like, I'll admit, right, for
It
most
is
of the
weird.
public, but I'm never going to tell a couple like kiss harder, like, so I'm going to let them enjoy that intimate moment themselves. Yeah.
Actually, one of the prompts that I use is like,
Really?
not kiss harder.
Oh,
It's like, hey, like, can we get a kiss? And like, now think about how weird it is to have someone you don't really know that well
yeah.
telling you to make out. It's usually when I use it the engagement session because it's our first time.
Right, right. Typically,
But
it's like somewhere kind of, at least for me, it's like naturey. So like I'll hide
yeah,
behind a bush. I'm like, it's weird that I'm watching you kiss while hiding behind a bush. If somebody else was
yeah,
watching this right now, they might be freaked out. Yeah. And then let's see. So it was not interrupting the ceremony, the intimate moments, but also not being aggressive when other guests take photos. And that's a big one for newer
ooh,
photographers as well. Let me ask you a question, Casey. Do you get upset when another guest or when a guest is taking a photo of, maybe a shot that you set up with their iPhone?
try not to care about it as much anymore. My issue is when people are distracting the couple or the wedding party while we're trying to do portraits. I will tell people now, one of the things I do now is I say, okay, everyone, I'm going to give you 1 minute
Hmm.
to take pictures of the bride and groom, wedding party, whatever, and then you're done, because I can't have them being distracted and looking off in different directions. Like, we're going to give you a little bit of time to take a few photos, but then they got to pay attention to me, because otherwise we'll get like one person looking off at Aunt Sue's camera, and
Yep.
then another person's, like, especially if you got little kids in the wedding party, it's like, ooh, they'll look anywhere. Yeah, but you turn every person in the, especially when it comes to wedding party photos or family photos, and they're looking off in different directions. It's just, yeah, I'm not aggressive anymore. There was a time when I think I was a little bit more, I don't know, I would say something if somebody like actually, like, if they physically touched me, like they were like, got like, I had a guy who was like shooting over my shoulder and was like
Oh,
almost kind of like leaning up against me. And I was just like, man, like I just can't, I'm trying to do my thing
yeah.
here. And like, you are invading my personal space.
That happened to me once as well. They didn't
Yeah.
necessarily touch me, but they definitely were shooting over me. And
Yeah.
I probably took the wrong approach, but everybody was happy about this actually. I straight up called them out in front of everybody, but not like, hey man, what are you doing? I was just like, once I noticed him, I stopped and I was like, oh, you want, like, here we go. Okay, everybody, we're going to and I said, what's your name, sir? And he was like, Mark or whatever. And I was like, okay, okay, okay. I said, we're going to let Mark take some photos with his iPhone while I step down. These photos are going to be really important right here. And it turns out, and everybody was like, Oh, like they understood what I was doing, obviously, and Mark felt super awkward, and I feel terrible. I probably should not have done that. That was
Sure.
being aggressive towards a guest, but he immediately backed down and never took a single photo later. Later, I found out that it was his daughter who was in the bridal party, and I thought to myself, what are you going to do with any of these photos?
Right.
Like you don't even know this couple really well at all. He just showed
Right.
up, I think, for the free dinner and
Mm.
wanted, So I
Pictures.
always find that weird.
Yeah, and like the thing gets me is when where it really aggravates me, I think, is where it gets on my nerves, is the people leaning out into the aisle
Oh yeah.
with their phones during the when the bride is or whoever is walking down the aisle towards me, and then I've got all these hands like leaning out. Oh, I'm gonna
With
get my photo. Like
phones.
they're just like, ah, this is such a terrible photo. Or like
Yeah.
the person who just wants to put their hand out and like record it. Like we're gonna get video of this whole thing, like just to stick my arm out in here. Like, no, like maybe there's a professional photographer here taking photos. And that's the only time I really there that I have find myself consistently being like wanting to say something.
Yeah.
Obviously I don't because I'm not going to interrupt the ceremony.
Yeah, that's right. That was the
I'm
chat
following ChatGPT's
wedding
guidelines. Like, I'm
advice.
not going to interrupt the ceremony. But I recently saw an article on one of the more premier wedding websites. I will not say whom, that talked about like, do we really need to be that concerned about like not being on our phones at not the guests not being on their phones at ceremonies, and like suggesting that they could be taking photos, whatever. It's like unplugged ceremonies. Should that be a thing of the past?
Really?
And I was sort of like, okay, do you want pictures of your all of your guests looking at their
Uh
phones?
huh.
Like that's the thing that I don't think people realize. They have this sense of like, I might get a great picture as a guest that you're gonna want. No,
No.
everybody's my guests at my own wedding like sent me hundreds and hundreds of pictures that they took. Have I, were any of them things that I've probably looked at more than once or twice? None, none. Just because it's like quality is not that good, and
Yeah.
like
Especially from a distance, and they got to zoom in.
yeah,
They always try to zoom in, and it's just
bad.
bad. It's bad
And
stuff.
I think that like there's like another thing that got me recently was I saw this TikTok. It was like giving our guests a like I'm going to give you categories of photos that you need to take throughout the day
Oh,
on a disposable like film
like a
camera
scavenger hunt.
scavenger hunt. Yes,
Uh huh.
that's what I was thinking of. I had the S, but I couldn't think of the word. Um, but like and one of them was like their first kiss in the ceremony,
Oh no.
and like cutting the cake, and like I'm like you're encouraging people to get in the way of your photographer.
Interfere. Yeah.
Yeah, like at these moments, and like I remember one of it, it happened at a wedding, and I told the couple afterwards that I was sorry that I didn't get a picture of the first kiss because one of their guests stepped out into the aisle directly in front of me during their first kiss at the end of the ceremony
Uh-huh.
and took a picture on their phone. And then like I was trying to get around them to take a picture, but it was over already.
Yeah.
And this person went, haha, I beat the photographer.
That was their attitude, or that's what they said.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
This is literally what the person said. This actually their response was, haha, laughed, like or not actually said, haha.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
beat the photographer, like,
Like it's
ooh,
a joke.
celebrating, like, oh yeah. Yeah, like with the people in there.
I got the scavenger hunt. Yay.
Yeah.
What do I win?
You win. Your friends no longer will not have a photo of their first kiss from their
Yeah.
wedding ceremony.
You will no
Yeah.
longer have game nights with your friends anymore.
I was like,
Horrible.
oh,
Oh
I
my
told them afterwards, I'm like, I don't want you to be upset with me
God.
when you get the photos back and there's no picture of this. Just letting you know that one of your guests stepped in front of me during that part of the ceremony
And it was
on
him. It
purpose.
was that guy. So if you know him,
And
then
I
he's
said, and they were like, oh, well, they were kind of like, oh, yeah, okay. And I said, I'm sure they will probably let you know because they were so proud of themselves. And then they kind of like laughed and they're like, yeah, we know who it was.
okay. Oh
Like,
my gosh. That's horrible. I hate to hear that because really, I mean, that actually leads into the next prompt here from next piece of advice from ChatGPT, which is not capturing key moments throughout the day. Now, the examples given are things like cake cutting and the first dance, but also the first kiss. But when it comes to missing those key moments, I find that the first kiss is obviously like the highest risk, right? Because one, it's so quick, and two, everybody wants to get a shot. And as you said, people will just step in front of the aisle. But things like the first dance and the cake cutting, I don't think I've ever had an issue with those, mostly because they are longer, but also people are typically sitting in their seats at that moment. I have had an issue with like the bouquet toss or something, where somebody steps in the way. But aside from that,
I don't know if it's more of a Midwestern thing because you're in the Midwest,
mhm.
but sometimes we'll have DJs be like, "Hey, everybody, get your cameras out! It's time for the cake cutting," and like, come take a photo of it. And I'm sort of like, "Dude, you're killing me
Yo, what are you
here!
doing?
Everybody stand behind me!" It's like, and I will make it very clear. I will say like, nobody come further than here.
Hmm.
Like, you want to take photos, great. You got to stay like behind here during the times when it gets aggravating for me and I just have to work around it when it comes to dances. When you get some family member who wants like to do video or get a photo of like during the first dance, and they'll be like walk right out onto the dance
Right onto the
floor
dance floor. Yeah,
and get like 4 feet away from them and like, look over here. Oh, no.
yeah.
Like, yeah, like I'm gonna take a picture. I'm gonna stand right in the way and it's like, and like stop interfering
Okay, yeah.
with moments of the day. And I get it a lot with the parent dances too,
Hmm.
where like some family member, like an aunt or an uncle, like brother or sister of whichever parent is dancing, will come like, oh, I want to get a photo of the two of you. Oh, great. And like make them stop and like pose for a picture. And yeah, it just sort of like, I feel like it cuts off the mood.
It does. I have experienced that, but luckily it's nothing. It never lasts for the whole dance. But
Yeah.
then again, like sometimes you don't know because sometimes a couple goes out and or a father daughter or whatever will go out and the dance, their dance is only like 45 seconds, and
Right.
you just have to hope that it goes
There's long
longer.
enough.
Yeah, but yeah, that really doesn't give you many options as far as different variety of compositions or focal lengths or anything. Now, when you shoot the like cake cutting, typically what's your lens setup there? I'm usually pretty wide, just I guess so that I hope to avoid any potential problems like that. But do you
You
take a
use a
different approach?
50. I shoot with a 50 usually.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have, but I'll stand back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like right up on them. It depends. Again, it depends on like the scenario
Sure.
and what your situation is. Sometimes closer. I've been finding recently a lot of people are doing the cake cutting sort of off to the side. Like they don't want to make it a big deal.
Really?
Like stop the reception and like stop the party.
Then at that
Um,
point, what's the point of the cake cutting?
well, they just want a picture of it. I mean,
Oh,
like,
okay.
and like we'll get some photos of them cutting cake and whatever, and that's it. And like, it's the same for me and for them, and we're getting the same photo, but we're not stopping the reception and telling everybody, "Hey, look over here, we're gonna
I
cut the
see.
cake."
Hmm.
So they still get it, and they still have that moment with each other and get the photos, but we're not stopping the flow of the party.
I see.
I a little weird how I do how I shoot the cake cutting. I have both bodies ready at that point. I usually shoot with a 135 and a 50.
With
I will
dual
shoot,
wielding cameras,
yeah,
how do you get
um,
the? You got to hold one with
left
the.
hand. Yes, I do a round with my left
Really?
hand. Yeah,
I'm gonna have to try that.
it's a little weird, and but what I will do is I will get the 50. I'm lined up and whatever, and then I will use the 135. I like to get close ups of the hands
Hmm. Hmm.
making the cut and like sometimes the faces, they're getting like in different composition. Like it doesn't have to be like their whole face, but like looking at each other, and you'll get like an interesting little composition there. Yeah.
I
So
like that.
that's how I shoot it.
That's why I'm excited for the, or kind of upset about the, what was it, the Light 16 camera or whatever, that could not only, you could
Electro.
infinitely adjust the focal length in post as well as the aperture.
Yeah. Was that the Litro, like the light field
Might have been,
cameras?
yeah, yeah. Such a
Any
cool
any
idea.
light field camera. Yeah, I remember when that first came out, and I was like, oh, they had one that was, I think it was back in the aughts.
Hmm.
They had one, and I was like, oh, this sounds like a great idea. And I was like, oh, you can only change it on their
Oh, proprietary
proprietary
software.
proprietary software. And
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I don't know if there was like output, like if you could output from it, or you just like view it in different ways. So yeah, that was, yeah,
Hopefully
that's
in the
sort of,
future we get there.
I don't know. And part of me is like, I don't necessarily want to do that.
Why is that?
Because I like that moment. Like I'm choosing like for me as a photographer, I'm choosing what's in focus.
Hmm.
And sure, there are times I think that it'd be pretty rare when I would want to go back and like, oh man, obviously there are mistakes that happen
Hmm.
in focusing on whatever. Like make a focusing mistake, and I would like to fix that. I think that's more common. But there aren't generally times when I go like, oh, I'd like to focus on something else in this photo. Because what I will normally do is I will shoot both of those.
Mm-hmm.
So I will take a picture of whatever's in the foreground that I wanted, and then I will adjust and take the picture of the thing in the background that I wanted to focus on. I will take both of those images and I might compose it slightly differently so that you know it's happening at the same time,
Yeah.
but I'm not always like, you understand what I mean?
I
Like,
do. I do. I guess in my head, I kind of, I guess I've always thought about these light field cameras a little bit differently, and how you just described it opened up my mind to a whole different world of possibilities. And I guess in my head, I kind of see it as kind of like shooting raw. Like
mm,
when you shoot in camera, it saves a JPEG version of it, and like that's done if you want it to be, or you can go in and change things like the exposure or the white balance to make
yeah,
more creative decisions. And I had always thought in my head, like, you'd still shoot it quote unquote right in camera for the way that you want it, but then you just had
you
the
could play with it.
options, yeah, to play
Mm.
with it later. And I didn't even think about the possibility of somebody just being like, we're just going to use it to capture everything and figure out how this wedding looks like in post.
Right. And there's a certain amount of it also, like, I think this goes back to like, you need a lot of light for those images. And that was the issue I think that they were having back. I don't know where they are now with implementing it, but like I think that when the first ones were coming out in like the late aughts, it was the Lytro. I don't know if they're still doing it. Like Lytro.
I think Apple
Was it?
bought them.
Oh yeah, they may have. Yes, they did. I think in the early teens, they had put out like 2 or 3 versions of the camera before they got bought.
Hmm.
And but the thing was that people weren't really discussing was you need a lot of light throughout like the frame.
I did not know
All
that.
like if you're taking a picture. So think about this. You're looking at me. There's a lot of light kind of like on my face at the moment. But is the item in the background that you want to switch the focus to? Is there light on that?
I see. Yeah, yeah, that's a good
You
point.
think about like it has to be like if you're going to just switch the focal length and change where the focus is, that doesn't mean like everything is properly lit
Hmm.
as you want it to be throughout the whole range of focal possibilities.
And like we were just saying, lighting, it's pretty important. Pretty
It is
important
pretty
stuff.
important.
Yeah, yeah. So we technically got 2 more, but we kind of already covered this next one, which was just delivering poor quality photos, and
Mm.
not just necessarily like in resolution, but photos with lack of proper lighting, lack of maybe they have poor editing, or
Yeah.
just show a lack of skill or knowledge in photography. So we got that one. The last one here is, and I think this one is underrated, and I applaud ChatGPT for coming up with this, not delivering on your promises as a wedding photographer.
Mm. Yes.
That's a big one.
Again, ChatGPT for the win.
For the win.
Uh, ding, ding, ding. I'll
You know what
take.
I'm going to do? I'm going to put my voice into the internet and then just say, come up with an episode of the Beginner Photography podcast, and then just take that script and put it into whatever AI voice augmenter I can come up with, and I can retire. That'll be great.
Yeah, just like have different episodes. It's just you talking. Um, well, I mean, doesn't Adobe have a thing where they can like listen to your voice for like if you read a certain amount of text
Right. Yes.
and it just listens to your voice and then it can like create your voice? Like James Earl Jones sold his voice.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Disney for AI.
I think the issue is things like inflection, and I'm
Yeah,
scared. I'm scared to try it out. But
it's for me. It'd be weird for me because I feel like one thing I always talk about Willie Nelson and why I like Willie Nelson is because you can listen to him sing the same song 100 times and it's always different
oh, weird.
because
Yeah.
it makes different inflections and it's like maybe I never loved you.
Hmm.
Like it's just like it just does it differently every time. And I feel like there are lots of times like I don't always say things with the same inflection, so I think it'd
Right.
be difficult to capture my personality with an AI
Still got
uh,
some work.
voice. Yeah. But to go back to delivering on your promises, I think this also deals with something I touched base on for managing expectations. If you over promise and under deliver, you're going to get a really bad reputation
Yep.
very quickly. And I've seen it happen in the wedding photography industry. There was a guy who became very popular in wedding photography because he was taking these beautiful photos and like all the wedding blogs and magazines went nuts for them. And he was just like, and I saw this interview with him in Rangefinder that said, I went from shooting 10 weddings a year to being booked for like 60 weddings and I'm booked for like the next 2 years. And
Jeez.
I immediately thought this is a recipe for disaster
Yeah.
because he's gonna have to scale up. And then I was actually having lunch with a group of photographers in the city, and there was another wedding photographer who I had not known this time, and she like hired this guy to do her wedding, and he completely bungled it
Oh no.
because he was doing 4 weddings that weekend, Thursday through
Oh.
Sunday, all over the country. Like he was flying from like Nevada to Minnesota to somewhere else. Like he completely she was waiting for her images and just waiting and waiting and waiting,
Hmm.
nothing happening. And he posted photos from a wedding at the same venue that they had, which was it's very specific. It was a gold mine,
Oh
and
wow.
it had been turned into a wedding venue. And he posted photos from another wedding that he shot there. And he had told her when he shot her wedding, he's like, "Oh, I've never been here before." And the bride from the other wedding that he's posting on
Uh-huh.
Facebook says, "Thank you so much for showing me the photos from that other wedding you did at this venue. That's part of the reason I booked you." So now the bride is thinking like, "Wait,
Those had to have been my
this
photos.
yeah, those had to be my photos, and you showed them to somebody else, but I haven't seen them yet."
Oh.
And before she had a chance to say anything, one of her bridesmaids said like, "Oh, these are lovely photos. Can't wait to see the photos from
Hmm.
the original wedding." And this guy was like, "You those will be ready when they're ready.
Whoa.
Stop being such a B word
No way.
and asking about them all the time." And the bridesmaid was like, "I've never asked you before." Meanwhile, the bride had said, had like reached out to him a bunch of times. Then she finally like reached out and said, like, "You showed my photos from my wedding to somebody else. Like, when do I get to see them?" And he goes, "Hey, I wasn't sure how to tell you this, but I lost most of the photos."
Oh.
Like, he's like, "I just, and you're talking to another photographer.
Yeah. So the plan was just to never tell her about it and just
You weren't going to tell me?"
hope that
Like,
it just gets swept under the rug.
right. Like, I paid you already, and like, you weren't going to say anything. And he was just like, "Yeah, it's just how like shit happens, I guess."
Oh.
And he's like, that's just the way things are." And did not apologize. She's like, "Can I see the photos that you did get?" And like, he basically got none of the portraits, no photos of her with her dad, who had since passed away,
No.
no photos of her with her brother, who like was walked her down the aisle, like none of the walking down the aisle, like there's all these things that were missing, like huge chunks of it. And then she did like started like looking around online and found like these communities of brides
Burned by
saying the
him.
same things about him, like that he would cancel, and they'd find out that he would say that like somebody in his family had died,
Oh.
and when he just wanted the better gig,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and
Oh
they'd
my
find out like,
gosh.
oh, he was, because he would stupidly post
Social media. Another
social
wedding
media,
day. Happy to
another
be
wedding.
here. Yeah.
Oh, so excited. And it's just like, yeah, you can't do that sort of, hey, that's just skeezy stuff to do.
Yeah.
But like, you can't over promise what you deliver to people. And
I don't even think that's over promising. That is
well,
just
that's
that is
just
just
not delivering.
base level
Uh,
promise, right? I will be at
yeah.
your wedding. I will take photos. I will give you photos. That is horrible. Yeah.
I've always, ascribed to, under promise, over deliver.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like, people are always happier when they get the photos faster than they expected,
Yeah.
or when they get more of whatever than they were expecting to get, as opposed to like you telling them they're going to get all this stuff. And then like, depending on the day of the wedding, I don't give a hard number
Mm-hmm.
on
Yeah.
a number on photos that I deliver, because I feel like this depends on the day. There's like so many different things. Like, well, give me an average per hour. I'm like, do your family and friends dance a lot? Like, because I did a wedding once where nobody danced,
Mm-hmm.
and that made it really difficult to get a lot of photos, because I had to like look around and really work to get pictures of people like having conversations that were interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't like to definitely, yeah, chat GPT wins on this one. Deliver on your promises. My suggestion, if you're starting out, especially if you're just starting out in wedding photography, if you're in like your first few years of this, take a step back on what you say you deliver. Like, not saying you have to like put it like half, but like, if you're at a 10, maybe a 9, and
Yeah.
just like, and deliver the 10. until you find out like more of what you're capable of. Because I think
Sure.
those first few years as a wedding photographer, you really don't know what you can do. You're really figuring things out still.
I agree. I mean, that's what's hard about it is that you're still so new that you got to figure these things out and like what it is that you actually want to do. For me, I think one of those things that everybody for a while, it's like those oh, what was it? Not wedding apps. Well, this is going to sound real stupid on the podcast, but there was something else that people were giving away. It was some sort of digital something or other.
Oh, like digital album or like
No, forget it.
uh,
I don't even remember what it was now. Like, I'm not going to try to make up something here.
I can tell you it's one thing: composited photos.
Tell me
Like,
more. Like
'cause I
swapping out
know
somebody's faces or?
no, just like when you see like this goes back to our what we were talking about with the Vogue cover shoot.
Oh,
Like
or the
we're gonna do that
dinosaur
in
or
5 minutes.
something.
But like I have a friend and he's been a guest on my podcast. His name's Leandro da Silva, and he takes these like very heavily composited like different shots of like wedding parties where he's like, putting together like 10 different photos, and they're beautiful. They're
Yeah,
beautiful photos, but he like manages the expectation of like I get two of these
I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in a wedding day because it takes 15 to 20 minutes
Hmm.
for each of these shots. And
Right.
he's very particular about with his couples saying like, "Hey, we get one or two, and that's it. Like we just don't have time to do a bunch of these. It just takes way too much time." But I think there are people out there who are like, "Oh yeah, we can do whatever." Like, "Oh, you want to do that?" Yeah, and like, and not really like managing the expectation of like, how much time is this going to take out of your day?
Yeah,
It's like
especially
this
like
sort of
because I think MagMod has really made those composite type photos really. I mean, they look great, right? When they're done well, they do look great. And like to have this idea that I'm going to go into a wedding and take like 9 of these, right? And set up my camera on a tripod, extra gear. Sometimes you don't bring a tripod to a wedding. I'm
right.
going to set up all these light stands. People have to be perfect. Everything's got to be underexposed. I'm going to do all this work. And then I have to bring it into Photoshop and put all these layers together. It does
Right.
take a lot of work. And
He
getting
has a lighting
9 at a
assistant.
wedding isn't going
He
to
has
happen.
a yeah. He has a lighting assistant that's just for those shots pretty much. Who
Wow.
goes around with holding a pole
Hmm.
and like he shoots each section of the shot. Like this person's like they're carrying his gear, but like that's one of their prime things because that's what he's known for.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, but he's very clear with people that you can't get that many of them.
And I'm sure after the
Yeah,
first one, he wasn't like, "That's it. I'm going to tell all my couples this is what they're getting."
right. And it's the yeah, I think there are people out there who want to like this goes back to like saying yes to everything. I can oh yeah, I can do that. Like don't tell people that you know how to like there's a venue in New York that or there's a bunch of them actually that are made from like old bank buildings or whatever. Like they're huge. They're these stuff that was built in the early 1900s, and they're huge, and they've got just these giant like 60-foot ceilings. Don't if you don't know how to light a room like that, like you got to be real careful about what you're promising people because it's real difficult.
Yeah.
And that's one of those instances where on-camera flash actually can help because there's giant rooms. Unless you're like setting up a 600-watt off-camera,
You're not going to be
like
bouncing.
yeah, because like there's no place to set up the lights in the room in the
Uh-huh.
middle of the room. Like I'm just gonna put this in the middle. Like they're like 200 to 250 to 300 guest venues. Like where are you putting your stuff?
Right.
Like anywhere near the dance floor that it's not going to show up in every shot. Yeah, it's not the yeah. You got to just be really careful about what you promise people.
Yeah, absolutely. And just because you've done it the once, you've practiced it, you
Mhm.
did it one time and it turned out great, doesn't mean it's ready for prime time. So
Yeah,
always
yeah.
always practice and know exactly what it is that you're getting into.
I find one of the best ways to practice lighting stuff like that, especially if you're doing it for portraits, is practice it during an engagement session and just say like, I'm working on something. Like, how about we take a few? Can we take a few photos like this? Like, it's something I'm like thinking of adding to my repertoire,
Hmm.
and then yeah, then you can get to practice it with people.
Do you ever say like, if it works out, awesome. If not, well, nobody ever has to see it
Yeah,
again. Yeah,
yes, I say
let them
that to
know.
people all the time. There's another thing that I do. I do like sort of panoramic composites
Yeah.
during the ceremony.
Hmm.
And I don't promise it to people. If I can get it, I can get it. And not every venue doesn't look good at every venue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
But like these are the things that happen after years of experience and trying things out, and it's better to not tell them that you're going to get it, or it's better to Yeah, not tell them that you're going to get it and find out that the venue is looks like garbage,
Right.
and then deliver a terrible photo just because it's that type of photo. So
Right.
I get it. I get it. Casey, we're at the end of our time here, man. This has been a monster of an episode. We're going on 2 hours here now. So
We've been talking, yes.
we've been
Well,
talking.
more than
We've been
that.
talking longer than that.
Yeah.
But you said more importantly what?
No, I was saying we have more than that because, it's just easy to talk.
Oh, it is. It is. I think last time you kicked me off because you're like, whoa, we're talking too much here and I don't like this. And then immediately afterwards, I cried. So I was excited to have this conversation with you again today. And I know that the listeners are going to enjoy this as well. And they're going to think this was fun. I want to hear more about Casey and the Nerdy Photographer podcast. So why don't you share with us where we can see more of your work online and also find the podcast?
If you want to see my work, you can always go to fatchett.com, FATCHETT. You can find me on various socials at KCF Photo. That's KCF Photo. You can find the Nerdy Photographer podcast online at thenerdyphotographer.com or at the Nerdy Photo, the Nerdy Photo on all the socials.
Man, I really hope that you enjoyed this episode of the podcast today, and you can take away something that, you either want to avoid or maybe something that you want to implement in your own photography. I don't know. Jury's out on that one, but let me know. So I want to invite you into the Beginner Photography Podcast community. If you want to grow your skills as a photographer, the best way to do that is to surround yourself with others who are just as passionate about photography as you and can provide helpful answers to your questions and even give a little feedback on your photos as well. So to join the most helpful community on the internet, just head over to beginnerphotopod.com/group. Again, beginnerphotopod.com/group, or you can click the link on the homepage now. That is it for this week. Thank you again for tuning into this week's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast, brought to you by CloudSpot. It is the easiest way to deliver and sell your photos online. You can learn more about CloudSpot and grab a free account by heading over to deliverphotos.com. And remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. Talk soon.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a review in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. And continue the conversation with Raymond and other listeners of the podcast by joining the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group today. Thank you. We'll see you again next week.